ancient, or should I say the early apostolic fathers, and also a lot of the saints of the church. So I don't know how many of them that you know, but the most important individuals in the church truly were black people. St. Augustine, who actually came from Tagaste, Numidia, was taught by St. Ambrose, the major bishop of that area. He right now, I have an article that Pope John Paul calls him the common father of Christendom. He calls him the common father of Christendom, St. Augustine. They call him the thinking machine of theology. He was the individual that laid the foundation for the interpretation specifically of this metaphorical concept. And that's posed to individuals like Paul, who is another very funny character. But when I began to study, I began to find some really, really strange things. Because when I was in catechism and involved in Christianity, I began to find out that a lot of the material just didn't hold water the way that I assumed that it really did. Eventually, my family dropped Christianity. They became Muslims, followers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and I went that route, and I studied a lot of that material. I had my relationship with the Nation of the Five Percenters. I probably was around them for more than 15, 20 years. And then I happened to be moved by this gentleman that I told you about, Professor George E. Simmons, who was the individual who actually moved me to, or spurred me to, go into the area of looking in more detail about history. But to go on, I began to read the Bible and began to find out that something ain't right, something is not right. Because I began to look at the material literally the way that I got it. And I began to find out that the material just did not hold water logically. Logically, there are things that you begin to look at, and I began to try to break down, and I just didn't come to grips with what that really meant. One of the things that I began to find out is the dating process of the Bible. I don't know how many people know the dating process of the Bible. Anybody ever had a Bible with dates? Somebody should raise their hand. Okay, I knew he would raise his hand. But you'll find out that there are certain Bibles that do have dates. I didn't happen to bring mine today, but I do bring a piece of paper that comes out of the first page of the Bible. As a matter of fact, I think I got this from you, Baba Sender, quite a number of years ago. But one thing I began to find out is the dates did not add up. They just did not add up. And one of the dates that were used in various points. The Eastern Orthodox Church in the 17th century said that the earliest date of creation was 5508. 5508. And they said that that was the earliest date in regard to the development of the Christian, or should I say, the earliest Christian, the Greek Orthodox perspective of the earliest date of creation, 5508. Then you had the Syriac, or the Syrian Christians, who said that the date was 4790. 4790. Now, a lot of this material that I'm going to be quoting comes from a book called The Chronological History of Humankind. I mean, the chronological history of the chronological prehistory all the way up into present-day history. It's like a big dictionary of dates and events. The next date was done by Archbishop Usher and Cambridge, University out of Europe, and that was 4004 BC. And then you also have the date that was used by the Jewish or the Hebrew community that actually came out to 3740, which actually comes out today to 5754. That's what the date that they particularly used. I think I have just 1 second. Because you have to understand that a lot of the dates actually are numbers that individuals either grabbed out of the air or that they use a particular date to coincide with the events that were already written. This is Star Ledger, Friday, September 17th, and it says, a blessed, happy 5,754. That's the earliest date that you'll find that a lot of them use. I'm talking about Hebrews now. Let me read a date to you that comes from Archbishop Usher. Okay, let's see now. And these dates, again, are not dates that are based on facts. They're based on man's perspective of how they began to deal with it. This is Archbishop Usher. Let me read. It says, this work, creation, took place, and man was created by the Trinity on October 23rd, 4004 BC at 9 o'clock in the morning. Should I read that again? 9 o'clock in the morning. And I always, you know, as John G. Jackson said, I wonder what was going on at 8 o'clock. But that's 4004 BC. This page here identifies, as you can see, it says the first books of Moses, called Genesis. And one thing that you find different about this page is that right here in the right-hand corner, it says 4004 BC. And I'm pretty sure that very few of you have seen a Bible that has dates in it. And this identifies some of the earliest concepts. So you really want to take into consideration how these dating processes came up. And I want to say this also is that this particular discourse is not, you know, bent on bashing at Christians or Jews or Muslims. It's just trying to give some information or clarity to where and how this material developed. Whether we look at it from a mythological, an allegorical, a traditional, or folkloric, we're just trying to clarify the material. The contents is not of my concern. It's how it developed that is my concern. Because we can all develop and benefit from principles, because these books are nothing but principles that govern and regulate man's conduct and behavior in his relationship with his fellow man, in his relationship with environment, but most of all, his personal communication with the unknown, or what we call God. That's all of what any book does, any religious book. Quran, Bible, Torah, Poppin' Voodoo, Bobbin Gator. I mean, you name them. I read quite a few of them, and I'm telling you that all of them deal with these concepts. They're rooted in principles in being able to regulate your relationships and how you conduct yourself as an upright, righteous individual. But I started looking and I started finding out some real strange things. First of all, the Bible was not a book that was written for the common individual to be read. It was never written for us to read. It was only written really for the priesthood to read, because they were codified and schooled in how to interpret and how to define the material, because a lot of it, as I said, was exoteric or esoteric. Esoteric meaning hidden or in a very spiritual nature, and exoteric meaning literal or very physical. And what happened is that there are some events in this book that are written as poetry, as mythology, as allegory, as folklore, as tradition, and as history. And it's important that you know how to decipher, how to break down, how to sift out what is what, so that you can benefit from that experience. But you'll find out as the more and more you begin to study, the broader your understanding becomes on how to interpret the material. So what I'm going to do today is try to break down some of the distortions, but most of all, to open up some of the complications that have been, we have been subjected to from what the Professor Simmons would call the pork chop chicken eating preachers have been giving us. And the reason I say that because religion also was used as a tool for political profitable gain, and one of the strongest tools that have been used then and now. More people died from religion than all the crack cocaine and all the alcohol and all the other wars that we could have had. You'll find out that religion was at the base of a lot of it. And I don't like to use religion in the context of it's just as an ideology. I'm talking about the practitioners of the religion. So we make clear, so you know how people say, I don't be beating up on my religion. Well, it's not about that, because there are individuals in every religion that you can look at and they are genuine and germane and they have a good attitude about helping you and things like that. But there's quite a few individuals that's out to get you through. So when I began to look at this book, I said, wow, how should I address it? And I began to read books by religious authors, but first by guys that Professor Simmons schooled me to, and Dr. Ben, The Chronology of the Bible, which is a quite old book by Dr. Ben, small pamphlet, but it gives you some basic material on the compilation of the Bible. And I began to look at how this book was written. One thing that I found out from the very beginning is that out of the books that were written, let's take the 39 books, the Christian concept of the Bible, the 39 books that are in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, they said out of them 39, 27 of them you cannot, this is in theology school and in seminaries, 27 of them books out of 39 that you cannot find the author for. The author is anonymous. That's not to say that there's somebody's name on them, because there's a lot of individuals who are given the attributed contribution as being the writer of a book, but you'll find out that when you do serious evaluation and scrutiny, you begin to find out that that individual is not the writer of the book. Let's take for an instance. I'm pretty sure you all have heard of the 5 books of Moses, the Pentateuch, the Torah. You'll find out that that book is attributed to who? Anybody know? Moses. And when we began to study the material in depth, we began to find out that, well, Moses might not have been the individual who have written those books. And the more and more we began to look at the material, we began to find out that the material just did not come up as being true. Moses lived actually between the last part of the 18th dynasty and the early part of the 19th dynasty. Give or take whoever Pharaoh, still they don't really know definitively which individual really it was that was the Shemsu, who really was the pharaoh or the king at the time that governed this event. But you'll find out that actually it was anywhere from about 1250 to 1350 BC. But a lot of the material that we begin to read about Moses is very, very, fragmented. It's very sketchy, and it doesn't hold enough water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a little bit of material to you out of this book here, Symbol, Sex, and the Stars by Ernest Busenbach in Popular Beliefs. And it deals with an outline of the origin of many customs, superstitions, mystic beliefs, and dogmas, specifically religions. But I'm going to read to you something that's going to really say some things that might change your whole attitude about some of these things. So just bear with me while I go through this. It says, leaders of the Jews faced a possible, and this is during the time, before I go, this is during the time of the expulsion of the Hebrews outside of Egypt. Because a lot of times, I'm pretty sure a lot of us, when we think about these stories, we think of them as literal history. But you're going to find out that as the archaeologists look at the material, it does not coincide with history. Some do, some don't. I also read a magazine called Biblical Archaeology, where that they try to prove a lot of these events. So much so I was in the supermarket and looked at one of them Star magazines, and they found Goliath's head with the stone still in it. So, just to give you an idea on how some of these stories came about. It says, leaders of the Jews faced the possibilities of their people intermarrying with Canaanites and gradually drifting away from their leadership. They also foresaw the danger of their people being absorbed culturally and militarily by their more powerful neighbors to the north, meaning the Egyptians. It says Israel was therefore between the jars of a giant nutcracker, which threatened the supremacy, if not the very existence of Jehovahism. If these dangers were to be overcome, the Jews would have to be welded into a nation quickly, thoroughly united by religion and government, and so completely set apart from all other nations that their identity as a people could never become lost. At this critical period, young King Josiah, apparently being deceived by the priests, became involved in a daring act of trickery, which was part of a plan for purging Israel of its idolatry. One day, in 621 BC, it was reported to the king that Hezekiah, the high priest, had found in the temple the book of laws, which had been strangely missing since its reputed promulgation by Moses some 800 or 900 years earlier. The story is best told in the 22nd or 23rd chapter of 2 Kings. But before continuing with the result of this discovery, it is necessary that a digression be made to speak of another important discovery. While engaged in the preparation of a graduation thesis for the University of Jena in 1805, William M.L. DeWitt decided that the book of laws founded by Hezekiah was none other than the book of Deuteronomy. If Moses had placed the code of laws in the book of Exodus, reasoned DeWitt, why should we have written another book treating of the same subject? In other words, the subject was that they were backsliding, and instead of accepting the word of God or the word of Jehovah and the laws of Jehovah, that they were backsliding and reverting back to the old ancient Egyptian and what we would call Mesopotamian religious systems. And this caused a problem for the early Jews. So what they did was they decided to come up with another book, vis-a-vis the book that was supposedly already in existence. But let me read on. It says, if Moses had the code of laws in the book of Exodus, reasoned DeWitt, why should he have written another book treating of the same subject, in which he gave commands directly contrary to those contained in the first book? Yet in Exodus, every son of Israel had been commanded to set up altars and offer sacrifices, whereas in Deuteronomy, observances of these rites were denied to all but the priesthood. After careful study of the spirit of the language of the new book, and that's really how the material is written, because the spirit of how the material is written is going to identify who becomes the writer. One of the most important things that you're going to find out about information, and that is that if you don't know the author, you're going to have a problem. Now that's not a problem all the way across the board, but it's going to give you a problem in regard to the interpretation of the material and the true meaning of the material. So if you can't tell me the author and what that material was really, what that author's purpose was really about, it's going to be hard to really define what the material is. We take it on assumption. So you're going to find out that author is very important. The title of the book, the author of the book, the date of the book. These are very, very important. The bibliography, the contents, and the introduction, or the preface, either or. Because the preface or the introduction tells you, one, the purpose or the attempt the author is going to make to address the subject matter. The contents gives you a chronological outline on the things that he is going to deal with, what areas he's going to cover. The bibliography gives the source of evidence that he is going to draw from to support his theory or his opinion about a subject matter. Because history is really one man's opinion about an event based on whatever evidence that he has to support it. That's all it is. But let me read on. It says that after careful study of the spirit of the language of the new book, DeWitt observed that it seemed peculiar, well adapted to meet the situation confronting Josiah, and in fact appeared to have been written not by Moses, but by a much later author. Continued research by modern authorities have fully confirmed DeWitt's keen deduction, and it is now generally conceded that Deuteronomy was written probably in Babylonia during the reign of King Manasseh or King Josiah. DeWitt discovered not only through new light on Deuteronomy, it also made it necessary to reconsider the entire story of the life of Moses. Scholars had long known that many details in the life of the great lawgiver were similar to events in the midst of the great god Bacchus from Greece. Like Moses, Bacchus was born in Egypt, was found floating in a basket, and had both real and foster mothers. Like Moses, he had made water gush from a stone by striking it with his staff. Like Moses, he wore 2 horns on his head. He became a lawmaker and wrote his laws on 2 tablets of stone. Moses performed miracles with snakes, like Bacchus, and was always portrayed with snakes. Moses waved his staff and made the waters of the Red Sea turn back. And Bacchus, did the same thing with the waters of Orontes River in Syria, in India. Now, what's the next question that should be asked here? I just read you something, a parallel of 2 stories, basically the same. What should be your question?